In the shadowed corridors of Belmont Palace, where whispers carry more weight than gold, and secrets sleep behind locked doors, one man's unwavering loyalty would be tested in ways he never imagined. What happens when duty collides with desire, and a single word can change the course of a kingdom's most guarded mysteries? The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Belmont Palace like a shroud of secrets, and Captain Marcus Thornfield knew that today would test every principle he had sworn to uphold. 23 years of service to the crown had taught him that the most dangerous moments often arrived disguised as ordinary requests, wrapped in silk gloves and delivered with practiced smiles. Marcus stood at his post outside the Queen's private chambers, his ceremonial sword gleaming in the pale morning light that filtered through the tall Gothic windows. The palace was stirring to life around him, but these corridors remained sanctuary, a place where even the most privileged members of the royal household treaded carefully. He had been handpicked by Queen Isabella herself for this position, chosen not just for his military record or his unwavering discretion, but for something deeper that the Queen had recognized in his character during their first meeting 5 years ago. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the marble hallway, the distinctive click of expensive heels against stone. Marcus straightened his already perfect posture as Duchess Helena Ashworth rounded the corner, her emerald silk dress rustling softly with each calculated step. The Duchess had married into the royal family 3 years ago, bringing with her a reputation for charm, intelligence, and an almost supernatural ability to navigate the treacherous waters of palace politics. "Captain Thornfield," she said, her voice carrying that peculiar mixture of warmth and authority that she had perfected. "How lovely to see you this morning. I trust you slept well?" Marcus inclined his head respectfully. "Your Grace, I am well. Thank you for asking." Helena moved closer, and Marcus caught the subtle scent of her perfume, something French and expensive that seemed to cost more than most people earned in a year. She had a way of making even the most formal interactions feel intimate, personal. It was a skill that had served her well in her rise through society's ranks, but Marcus had learned to recognize it for what it was, a carefully crafted tool. "I have a small favor to ask," Helena continued, her blue eyes meeting his with practiced sincerity. "Queen Isabella mentioned yesterday that she wanted me to retrieve some documents from her private safe. Family genealogy records, I believe. Something about updating the official family tree for the upcoming Jubilee celebrations." Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the same sensation he had experienced countless times during his military service when something didn't feel quite right. The Queen's private safe was legendary within the palace walls, a fortress of secrets that contained everything from state documents to personal letters spanning decades of royal history. Access was restricted to Queen Isabella herself and 2 other individuals: the Prime Minister during times of constitutional crisis, and the Archbishop of Canterbury for matters of succession. "I'm afraid I would need direct authorization from Her Majesty for any access to the private safe, Your Grace," Marcus replied carefully. "Palace protocol is quite specific on this matter." Helena's smile never wavered, but Marcus caught the briefest flash of something in her eyes. Annoyance, perhaps. Or calculation. "Of course, I completely understand your position, but you see, Queen Isabella is currently in her morning conference with the Foreign Secretary, and I'm expected at the Children's Hospital charity luncheon in just 2 hours. The genealogy department needs these documents today to meet their deadline for the Jubilee program." She moved even closer, and Marcus could see the fine lines around her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite conceal, the result of years spent smiling when she perhaps didn't want to. "Surely we can expedite this small matter. I can provide written authorization afterward if needed. You've known me for 3 years, Captain. You know I would never ask for anything inappropriate." Marcus had indeed known Helena for 3 years, and that was precisely why every instinct he had developed over 2 decades of service was now screaming warnings. He had watched her navigate countless situations with the same combination of charm, urgency, and implied consequence. He had seen her convince stable masters to saddle horses for unauthorized rides, persuade kitchen staff to prepare elaborate meals for unofficial guests, and talk her way past security checkpoints with nothing more than a winning smile and a carefully constructed story. But the Queen's private safe was different. It wasn't just another palace convenience to be negotiated with charm and influence. It was the heart of the monarchy's most sensitive information, protected not just by physical barriers but by centuries of tradition and protocol that had been written in the blood of those who had died to protect royal secrets. "Your Grace," Marcus said, his voice remaining steady despite the growing tension he felt, "I'm certain you understand that the safe security protocols exist for the protection of the crown itself. Even with your position in the family, I cannot grant access without the Queen's direct personal authorization." Elena's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the practiced warmth cooling by several degrees. "Captain Thornfield, I'm not some ambitious courtier seeking to rifle through private papers for gossip. I am a member of this family, sworn to protect its interests just as you are. The Queen specifically requested that I handle this matter." Marcus had heard similar claims countless times during his service, from people far more powerful than Helena. Foreign ministers had tried to convince him to bend protocols. Senior royals had suggested that their status should override security measures, and even high-ranking military officials had attempted to use their authority to circumvent proper procedures. In each case, Marcus had learned that those most insistent about their right to bypass security were often those who should be trusted with it least. "If Her Majesty specifically requested your assistance with this matter," Marcus said carefully, "then I'm certain she would have no objection to providing direct authorization. Shall I request an audience for you?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Marcus watched Helena's face as she processed the implications. If she truly had the Queen's authorization, requesting a brief audience would be a minor inconvenience. If she didn't, such a request would expose her deception and potentially create a scandal that could reverberate throughout the palace. Helena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving past Marcus to the ornate door that led to the Queen's private chambers. The silence stretched uncomfortably, filled only by the distant sounds of palace life. Servants moving through distant corridors, the chiming of an ancient clock, the rustle of wind through the courtyard gardens. "The Queen is extremely busy this morning," Helena finally said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "The Foreign Secretary's visit is addressing some rather urgent international matters. I hardly think we should interrupt affairs of state for what amounts to a simple administrative task." Marcus nodded respectfully, but his resolve only strengthened. In his experience, people with legitimate authority rarely objected to having that authority verified. Those with something to hide, however, often became frustrated when faced with proper protocols. "I understand your concern about interrupting important matters," Marcus replied. "However, the security protocols surrounding the private safe are considered matters of state themselves. I'm certain Her Majesty would prefer a brief interruption to any compromise of those protocols." Helena's charm offensive was clearly not working, and Marcus could see her recalculating her approach. She took a step back, creating a bit of distance between them, and when she spoke again, her tone had shifted to something more authoritative, more befitting her rank. "Captain Thornfield, I appreciate your dedication to protocol, but I think you may be overcomplicating what should be a straightforward matter. I am not some stranger requesting access to sensitive materials. I am a member of this royal family, and I have been entrusted with responsibilities that require a certain level of access and autonomy." The implicit threat in her words was clear, though delivered with the polished subtlety that marked all palace politics. She was reminding him of the difference in their social standings, of her ability to make his life difficult if he continued to be obstinate. It was a familiar tactic, one that had probably worked for her many times before, with people who valued their positions more than their principles. But Marcus had not survived 23 years of service, including 5 years in the army and 18 in royal protection, by being easily intimidated. He had faced down angry crowds, suspicious foreign dignitaries, and even members of the royal family themselves when duty demanded it. His loyalty was to the crown as an institution, not to any individual who happened to wear it or marry into it. "Your Grace," he said, his voice remaining respectful but firm, "my responsibilities require me to follow established protocols regardless of the inconvenience they may cause. The Queen herself established these procedures, and I am bound by my oath to uphold them." Helena studied his face for a long moment, perhaps looking for some sign of weakness or uncertainty that she could exploit. Marcus met her gaze steadily, drawing on years of experience in maintaining composure under pressure. He had learned long ago that the moment you showed doubt or hesitation, you had already lost whatever battle you were fighting. "Very well," Helena said finally, her voice carrying a note of barely controlled frustration. I can see that you intend to make this as difficult as possible. Perhaps I should speak with the palace security director about whether current protocols are truly serving the royal family's best interests. It was a clear threat, an attempt to go over his head and use her influence to force compliance. Marcus had seen this tactic used before, and he knew that sometimes it worked. Palace politics could be more treacherous than any battlefield, and those who wielded influence effectively could sometimes override even the most sensible security measures. But Marcus also knew that the security director, Colonel Patricia Westbrook, was a woman of uncompromising integrity who had spent her own career building and refining the very protocols that Helena was now trying to circumvent. If anything, involving Colonel Westbrook would likely result in a thorough review of this entire interaction, something that Marcus doubted Helena would welcome. "Of course, Your Grace," Marcus replied calmly. Colonel Westbrook would be the appropriate person to address any concerns about current security protocols. I'm certain she would be happy to review the situation and provide clarification on proper procedures. Helena's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, though she quickly masked it with another practiced smile. "I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot here, Captain. I'm not trying to circumvent security or create problems. I'm simply trying to fulfill a responsibility that the Queen has given me, and I had hoped that we could work together to accomplish that efficiently." Marcus appreciated the attempt to de-escalate the situation, but he also recognized it as another tactical shift rather than a genuine change of heart. Helena was clearly someone who was accustomed to getting her way through a combination of charm, authority, and persistence, and she was now cycling through her available strategies. "I understand your position, Your Grace," Marcus said, "and I have no desire to create unnecessary obstacles. However, the protocols exist to protect not just the Crown's security, but also to protect individuals like yourself from any later questions about proper authorization. If there were ever any inquiry about access to the safe, you would want to be certain that all proper procedures were followed." It was a diplomatic way of pointing out that her current approach could potentially create problems for her later, while also making it clear that he was not going to be moved by appeals to efficiency or convenience. Marcus had found that sometimes people needed to understand the potential consequences of their requests before they would accept the wisdom of following proper procedures. Helena appeared to consider this for a moment, and Marcus could almost see her weighing the risks and benefits of continuing to push for immediate access versus accepting the delay that proper authorization would require. The calculation playing out behind her eyes was complex, involving factors that Marcus could only guess at. Her standing within the family, the importance of whatever she was really seeking, and the potential consequences of having this interaction become a matter of official record. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the tense standoff, and both Marcus and Helena turned to see Lady Catherine Mills, the Queen's private secretary, walking briskly down the corridor with a stack of papers in her arms. Lady Catherine was a formidable woman in her late 50s who had managed the Queen's personal affairs for over a decade with efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. "Your Grace, Captain Thornfield," Lady Catherine said with a polite nod as she approached. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Marcus felt a surge of relief at the interruption, though he was careful not to let it show in his expression. Lady Catherine's presence would add another layer of oversight to whatever Helena was attempting to accomplish, and her knowledge of the Queen's actual schedule and priorities was encyclopedic. "Lady Catherine," Helena said with renewed warmth, "how perfect that you're here. I was just explaining to Captain Thornfield that the Queen asked me to retrieve some genealogy documents from her private safe for the Jubilee preparations. Perhaps you could help clarify the authorization procedures?" Lady Catherine's expression remained politely neutral, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she found Helena's claim interesting for reasons that probably had nothing to do with genealogy research. "I'm afraid I'm not familiar with any such request," Lady Catherine said carefully. "The Jubilee genealogy work is being handled by the Royal Archives Department, and they've been working from copies of documents that were provided to them several months ago. Is there something specific that Her Majesty felt was missing from their materials?" The question was asked with perfect politeness, but its implications were devastating to Helena's position. If the genealogy work was already proceeding with appropriate documentation, and if Lady Catherine, who managed every aspect of the Queen's personal business, was unaware of any request for additional materials, then Helena's entire justification had just crumbled. Marcus watched Helena's face as she processed this new information, and he could see her rapidly calculating whether to abandon her current story, modify it, or double down despite the obvious contradictions. It was a moment of truth that would reveal a great deal about her character and her true intentions. "Perhaps I misunderstood the specific nature of the documents," Helena said after a pause that lasted just a moment too long. "The Queen mentioned something about family records yesterday, and I may have assumed it was related to the Jubilee work. You know how these conversations can be. Sometimes the details blur together." It was a reasonably graceful retreat, an attempt to reframe her request as a misunderstanding rather than a deliberate deception. But Marcus could see that Lady Catherine was far from satisfied with this explanation, and he suspected that this entire interaction would be making its way into one of her meticulous reports that chronicled everything that happened within the Queen's sphere of influence. "Perhaps," Lady Catherine said with the diplomatic precision that had made her indispensable to the royal household, "it would be helpful if I checked with Her Majesty about the specific nature of any documents she might need. I'm meeting with her in 15 minutes to review today's correspondence." Marcus admired the elegant trap that Lady Catherine had just set. By offering to verify Helena's claims directly with the Queen, she had created a situation where any deception would be immediately exposed, while still maintaining the polite fiction that this might all be a simple misunderstanding. Helena's smile never faltered, but Marcus could see the tension building in her shoulders. "That's very thoughtful, Lady Catherine, but I wouldn't want to burden Her Majesty with such a minor administrative matter. Perhaps I should simply wait until she has more time to discuss it properly." "Nonsense," Lady Catherine replied cheerfully. "Her Majesty is always interested in ensuring that family records are properly maintained. I'm certain she would want any confusion cleared up immediately." The conversation had taken on the quality of a fencing match, with each participant making careful moves while maintaining perfect courtesy. Marcus found himself grudgingly impressed with Helena's composure under pressure, even as he remained committed to blocking her access to the safe. She was clearly someone who was accustomed to navigating complex political situations, but she had underestimated both the strength of the palace's security protocols and the dedication of those charged with enforcing them. "Actually," Helena said, glancing at her watch with apparent concern, "I've just realized that I need to leave for the hospital charity luncheon quite soon. Perhaps we should postpone this entire matter until later in the week when everyone has more time to sort out the details properly." It was a strategic retreat disguised as a scheduling conflict, and Marcus recognized it as such. Helena had clearly realized that her current approach was not going to succeed, and she was looking for a way to withdraw without admitting defeat or creating a permanent record of her unsuccessful attempt. But Lady Catherine was not inclined to let the matter drop so easily. "I'm certain we can resolve this quickly," she said with the same cheerful determination that had probably terrorized junior staff members for years. "Why don't I simply mention it to Her Majesty during our meeting? If she did make such a request, she can provide proper authorization. If not, then we'll know it was simply a miscommunication." Helena's composure finally showed its first real crack, a momentary tightening around her eyes that suggested she was beginning to understand that her carefully constructed story was about to be thoroughly examined by people who had made careers out of managing royal business with obsessive attention to detail. "Lady Catherine," Helena said, her voice taking on a slightly strained quality, "I appreciate your diligence, but I'm concerned that we're making far too much of what was intended to be a simple request. Perhaps it would be better if I simply spoke with the Queen directly when she has time." Marcus could see that Helena was becoming genuinely uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. What had started as a straightforward attempt to access the safe through charm and authority had evolved into a situation where her claims would be directly verified with the Queen herself. Exactly the kind of scrutiny she had clearly hoped to avoid. "Of course," Lady Catherine agreed readily. "Though I should mention that Her Majesty's schedule is quite full this week with the Foreign Secretary's visit and the upcoming trade delegation. It might be several days before she has time for non-urgent personal matters." The implication was clear. If Helena truly needed these documents for legitimate purposes, the delay would be inconvenient but manageable. If her needs were more urgent than she was admitting, the delay might force her to reveal more about her true motivations. Marcus watched the interplay between the two women with professional appreciation. Lady Catherine was demonstrating why she had risen to such a position of trust within the royal household. She combined absolute loyalty with razor-sharp intelligence and an understanding of palace politics that bordered on the supernatural. "I should really be going," Helena said, finally abandoning any pretense of pursuing the matter further. "The charity luncheon organizers are expecting me, and punctuality is so important for these events." "Of course," Marcus said, speaking for the first time since Lady Catherine's arrival. "I hope the event goes well, Your Grace." Helena nodded to both of them, her smile back to its practiced perfection, though Marcus could see the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "Thank you both for your attention to this matter. I'm certain we can sort everything out properly when there's more time." As Helena's footsteps echoed down the corridor, growing fainter with each step, Marcus and Lady Catherine stood in companionable silence for several moments. The tension that had filled the hallway gradually dissipated, replaced by the peaceful quiet that normally characterized this part of the palace. "Interesting morning," Lady Catherine observed finally, her voice carefully neutral. "Indeed," Marcus agreed, maintaining the diplomatic discretion that his position required. Though both of them undoubtedly had thoughts about what had just occurred, palace protocol discouraged open speculation about the motivations of royal family members. Lady Catherine shifted the papers in her arms and glanced toward the Queen's chambers. "I should prepare for my meeting with Her Majesty. Is there anything specific about this morning's events that should be included in today's security briefing?" It was a carefully worded question that gave Marcus the opportunity to make this incident part of the official record without requiring him to make explicit accusations or judgments. The palace ran on such subtle communications where important information was shared through implication and nuance rather than direct statement. "I think it would be appropriate to note that there was an inquiry about access to the private safe," Marcus said thoughtfully. Standard protocols were followed and no unauthorized access was granted. The inquiry was withdrawn when proper authorization procedures were explained.
Lady Catherine nodded approvingly.
It was exactly the kind of factual, objective summary that would provide a record of events without unnecessary editorial comment. If there were questions later, the record would show that security protocols had been followed and that no breaches had occurred. "I'll make sure that information is properly documented," Lady Catherine said. "Colonel Westbrook appreciates thorough reporting on all security-related matters." As Lady Catherine continued toward the Queen's chambers, Marcus resumed his post with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The encounter with Helena had tested both his resolve and his understanding of palace protocols, and he felt confident that he had handled the situation appropriately. The safe remained secure, proper procedures had been followed, and the incident had been handled in a way that minimized potential embarrassment for everyone involved. But even as he settled back into his routine, Marcus found himself wondering about Helena's true motivations. Her story about genealogy research had been plausible enough on the surface, but the details hadn't held up under scrutiny. More concerning was her apparent expectation that she should be able to access the safe without proper authorization, a presumption that suggested either a fundamental misunderstanding of security protocols or a belief that her position within the family entitled her to bypass established procedures. The Queen's private safe contained decades of accumulated documents, letters, and records that chronicled not just official royal business but also personal family matters that could be devastating if they fell into the wrong hands. State papers, diplomatic correspondence, financial records, and personal letters from other royal families around the world. All of it was protected by security measures that had been refined over generations of experience, with everything from foreign espionage to domestic political intrigue. Marcus had been briefed on the general contents of the safe when he accepted his current position, though he had never actually seen inside it himself. The briefing had been conducted by Colonel Westbrook personally, and she had made it clear that the safe's security was considered a matter of national importance. The information it contained could impact everything from international relations to the line of succession, and any compromise could have consequences that extended far beyond the palace walls. Helena's attempt to access the safe raised uncomfortable questions about her knowledge of what it contained and her reasons for wanting to reach it. Her story about genealogy research might have been a complete fabrication, or it might have been a half-truth designed to conceal other objectives. Either possibility was troubling, and Marcus found himself hoping that Lady Catherine's meeting with the Queen would shed some light on the true nature of Helena's request. The morning continued with its usual routine of changing guards, security briefings, and the constant low-level vigilance that characterized palace protection work. But Marcus found his thoughts returning repeatedly to the encounter with Helena, analyzing her words and behavior for clues about her true intentions. As the afternoon approached, Marcus was relieved by Sergeant James Fletcher, a competent and experienced guard who had been with the palace security force for nearly a decade. The changing of the guard was conducted with the same ceremonial precision that marked all palace protocols, a reminder that even the smallest traditions served important purposes in maintaining the dignity and security of the royal household. Marcus made his way to the security office to complete his daily reports, a task that usually took only a few minutes but which today would require more careful attention to detail. The incident with Helena needed to be documented thoroughly but diplomatically, creating a record that would be useful if questions arose later while avoiding unnecessary inflammatory language. The security office was a modern addition to the ancient palace, fitted with the latest in surveillance and communication technology, while remaining discreetly hidden behind traditional oak paneling that matched the rest of the building's interior. Colonel Westbrook maintained her office here, and her presence could be felt even when she wasn't physically present. Everything was organized with military precision, and the staff moved with the quiet efficiency that came from working under a commander who demanded excellence in all things. Marcus settled at one of the computer terminals and began composing his report, choosing each word carefully to convey the essential facts without unnecessary interpretation. The art of security reporting was to provide enough information for decision-makers to understand what had happened while avoiding speculation that could prejudice later investigations or create diplomatic problems. "Thornfield," came a voice from behind him, and Marcus turned to see Colonel Westbrook emerging from her private office. Patricia Westbrook was a woman in her early 50s who had transitioned from a distinguished military career to royal protection work, bringing with her a combination of tactical expertise and political sophistication that made her ideally suited for managing palace security. "Colonel," Marcus said, rising respectfully. "I understand there was some excitement this morning," Westbrook said, her tone carefully neutral. "Lady Catherine mentioned that you handled an access request for the Queen's private safe." Marcus nodded, grateful that Lady Catherine had already provided a preliminary briefing. It suggested that the matter was being taken seriously at the highest levels, which was both reassuring and slightly concerning. "Yes, ma'am. Duchess Helena requested access without proper authorization. I followed standard protocols and denied the request. She withdrew the inquiry when proper procedures were explained." Westbrook studied Marcus for a moment, her experienced eyes reading the subtle signals that came from years of military service and security work. She had a reputation for being able to extract the full story from even the most diplomatically worded reports, and Marcus suspected she was evaluating not just what he had said but what he had left unsaid. "Was there anything about the request that seemed unusual?" Westbrook asked. It was an interesting question, and Marcus considered his answer carefully. Westbrook was clearly fishing for additional information, which suggested that either she had concerns about Helena's motivations or she had received additional information from other sources. "The Duchess seemed to expect that her position within the family would be sufficient authorization," Marcus said finally. "When I explained the need for direct approval from Her Majesty, she appeared frustrated and suggested that protocols might be unnecessarily restrictive." Westbrook nodded slowly, as if this information confirmed suspicions she had already formed. "Did she provide any specific justification for the urgency of her request?" "She claimed to need genealogy documents for Jubilee preparations, but Lady Catherine indicated that such work was already proceeding with appropriate materials. The Duchess then suggested that she may have misunderstood the nature of the Queen's request." "Interesting," Westbrook murmured. "And her reaction when proper authorization was suggested?" Marcus hesitated for just a moment, aware that his next words might have implications that extended well beyond his own duties. But his oath required complete honesty with his superiors, and Westbrook needed accurate information to make appropriate security decisions. "She seemed reluctant to have her request verified directly with Her Majesty," Marcus said. "When Lady Catherine offered to mention the matter during their scheduled meeting, the Duchess suggested postponing the entire issue." Westbrook's expression remained carefully neutral, but Marcus could see her processing the implications of this information. A legitimate request would not typically be withdrawn when proper authorization procedures were offered, and Helena's reluctance to have her claims verified suggested that she knew they wouldn't withstand scrutiny. "You handled the situation appropriately," Westbrook said finally. The safe's security is paramount, and you were right to insist on proper protocols, regardless of the inconvenience to anyone involved. Marcus felt a sense of relief at the approval, though he hadn't really doubted that he had acted correctly. Still, it was reassuring to have his judgment confirmed by someone with Westbrook's experience and authority. Is there any additional information I should be aware of regarding the Duchess or her activities? Marcus asked carefully. Westbrook considered the question for a moment, and Marcus could see her weighing how much information to share. Palace security operated on a need-to-know basis, and even senior guards were not always briefed on all the political undercurrents that might affect their duties. Nothing specific, Westbrook said finally. But I want you to be particularly alert to any unusual requests or activities involving the Queen's private chambers. Document everything thoroughly, and don't hesitate to contact me directly if you have any concerns. The instruction was both reassuring and slightly ominous. It suggested that Westbrook took the morning's incident seriously enough to warrant increased vigilance, but it also implied that there might be additional threats or concerns that Marcus wasn't being told about. Understood, Colonel, Marcus said. Good. Complete your report and make sure it includes all the details we've discussed. I'll want to review it before it goes into the permanent file. As Westbrook returned to her office, Marcus turned back to his computer with renewed focus. The conversation had confirmed his suspicions that the morning's incident was more significant than it might have appeared on the surface, and he wanted to ensure that his report captured every relevant detail that might be important for future reference. The following morning brought an unexpected development that would transform Marcus's understanding of the previous day's events. He arrived at his post 30 minutes early, as was his custom, to review overnight security reports and ensure that the Queen's chambers were properly prepared for the day ahead. The palace at dawn held a particular tranquility that he had grown to appreciate, a brief window of peace before the machinery of royal business began its daily operation. Lady Catherine was already at work in the Queen's outer office, her desk lamp creating a small pool of warm light in the pre-dawn darkness. She looked up as Marcus passed, her expression more serious than usual. "Captain Thornfield," she said quietly, "could I have a word with you privately?" Marcus stepped into the office, noting that Lady Catherine had closed the door behind him, an unusual breach of normal protocol that immediately put him on alert. In the palace, private conversations behind closed doors typically meant that sensitive information was about to be shared. "I spoke with Her Majesty yesterday evening about the genealogy documents that Duchess Helena mentioned," Lady Catherine began without preamble. "As I suspected, no such request was ever made." Marcus felt his chest tighten, though he wasn't entirely surprised by this revelation. Helena's story had contained too many inconsistencies to be entirely credible, and her reluctance to have it verified had strongly suggested that she was not being entirely truthful. However, Lady Catherine continued, "Her Majesty's reaction to my inquiry was quite illuminating. It seems that the Duchess has made several indirect attempts over the past few weeks to gain information about the contents of the private safe. Nothing as direct as yesterday's request, but a pattern of casual questions about family records, historical documents, and the like. This information cast the previous day's incident in an entirely different light. What Marcus had interpreted as an opportunistic attempt to bypass security protocols now appeared to be part of a sustained campaign to gain access to sensitive information. Did Her Majesty indicate what she thought the Duchess might be seeking? Marcus asked. Lady Catherine hesitated, and Marcus could see her weighing how much information to share. The relationship between the Queen and her family members was always delicate territory for palace staff, who had to balance their duty to protect royal interests with their obligation to maintain appropriate discretion. Her Majesty expressed concern that the Duchess might be experiencing financial difficulties, Lady Catherine said finally. There have been some irregularities in household accounts that the Duchess manages, and certain expenditures that seem inconsistent with authorized budgets. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. If Helena was experiencing financial problems, the Queen's private safe would indeed contain documents that could be extremely valuable, either as blackmail material or as sources of information that could be sold to interested parties. Royal family financial records, personal correspondence with other heads of state, or sensitive political documents could command enormous sums on the black market. Has this information been shared with Colonel Westbrook? Marcus asked. Her Majesty plans to discuss the matter with the Colonel this morning, Lady Catherine replied. but I wanted to brief you first given your direct involvement in yesterday's incident. Marcus appreciated the advance warning, though it also placed him in the uncomfortable position of knowing information that might affect his interactions with Helena while being unable to take any direct action based on that knowledge. Palace protocol required that such matters be handled through proper channels, which meant waiting for Colonel Westbrook to receive official direction from the Queen herself. Is there anything specific you think I should be aware of in terms of my duties? Marcus asked. Lady Catherine considered this for a moment. Her Majesty emphasized that the security of the private safe is of paramount importance. She also mentioned that she would prefer to handle any family matters internally, if possible, rather than involving outside authorities. The implication was clear. The Queen hoped that whatever Helena was planning could be stopped without creating a public scandal that would damage the royal family's reputation. It was a delicate balancing act between maintaining security and protecting family privacy, one that would require careful coordination between all the relevant parties. I understand, Marcus said. I'll continue to follow standard protocols while remaining alert to any unusual activities. Thank you, Captain. I knew I could count on your discretion in this matter. As Marcus took up his position outside the Queen's chambers, he found himself viewing the familiar corridors with new eyes. The incident with Helena was no longer an isolated breach of protocol, but part of a larger pattern that suggested serious problems within the royal family itself. The realization that he might be standing between the Crown's most sensitive secrets and someone willing to exploit them for personal gain added a new weight to his responsibilities. The morning proceeded with unusual quiet, though Marcus remained hyper-aware of every sound and movement in the surrounding corridors. The Queen emerged from her chambers at precisely 9 o'clock for her meeting with Colonel Westbrook, offering Marcus a brief nod of acknowledgement that seemed to carry additional meaning given the circumstances. Colonel Westbrook arrived shortly afterward, her expression more serious than Marcus had seen it in months. She paused briefly at Marcus's position, long enough to murmur, "Enhanced vigilance protocols are now in effect," before continuing into the Queen's chambers. The phrase was a coded instruction that Marcus recognized from his security training. It meant that a credible threat had been identified and that all personnel should be prepared for potential incidents. It also meant that additional security measures were being implemented, though Marcus wouldn't be briefed on the specific details unless they directly affected his duties. About an hour later, Colonel Westbrook emerged from the meeting and approached Marcus directly. Her expression was grim, and Marcus prepared himself for news that he suspected would not be welcome. The Queen has authorized a comprehensive security review of all access protocols for sensitive materials, Westbrook said quietly. Effective immediately, any requests for access to restricted areas or documents must be verified through both her private secretary and myself, regardless of the rank or family status of the individual making the request. Marcus nodded his understanding. The new protocols would make it virtually impossible for Helena or anyone else to gain unauthorized access through charm or presumed authority, though they would also create additional bureaucratic steps for legitimate requests. Additionally, Westbrook continued, we'll be implementing discreet surveillance of all approaches to the Queen's private chambers. Nothing that would be noticed by casual visitors, but sufficient to provide warning if anyone attempts to access restricted areas when the regular guard posts are unoccupied. Marcus appreciated the additional security measures, though their necessity suggested that the threat was considered quite serious. The Queen's chambers had never before required electronic surveillance during his tenure, and the decision to install it now indicated that traditional security measures were considered insufficient. Is there anything specific about the Duchess that I should be watching for? Marcus asked carefully. Westbrook looked around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard, then stepped closer to Marcus. Her Majesty has become aware that the Duchess has been researching the historical value of certain royal documents and artifacts. There's evidence that she's been in contact with private collectors and auction houses, apparently under the pretense of academic research. The implications of this revelation were staggering. If Helena was planning to steal royal documents for sale to private collectors, she would be committing not just theft but treason, crimes that could result in imprisonment and would certainly destroy her marriage and her position within the royal family. Has she attempted to remove anything from the palace? Marcus asked. Not as far as we know, Westbrook replied. But given yesterday's incident and the pattern of her recent activities, we have to assume that she's planning something more direct. The private safe would be the logical target since it contains the most valuable and sensitive documents. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He was no longer just protecting the Queen's privacy but potentially preventing a crime that could shake the monarchy to its foundation. "What are my specific instructions if she makes another attempt?" Marcus asked. "Follow standard protocols exactly as you did yesterday," Westbrook said. "Don't deviate from procedure under any circumstances, regardless of what authority she claims or what pressure she applies. If she becomes insistent or attempts to circumvent your authority, contact me immediately." As Colonel Westbrook returned to her office, Marcus found himself facing a day that suddenly felt charged with potential danger. The familiar corridors now seemed to harbor threats, and every approaching footstep could signal the beginning of a crisis that would test everything he had learned about duty, loyalty, and courage. The afternoon brought a stream of visitors and meetings that kept Marcus alert but provided no sign of Helena. The Queen received a delegation from the Ministry of Culture, followed by a private audience with the Archbishop of Canterbury, and finally a working meeting with her private financial advisors. Each interaction proceeded normally, but Marcus found himself evaluating each visitor with new scrutiny, aware that the palace's security had been compromised by someone who should have been trustworthy. As evening approached, Marcus was preparing to hand over his duties to the night watch when Lady Catherine appeared at his post with an expression of urgent concern. "Captain Thornfield," she said quietly, "we may have a problem. The Duchess has requested a private audience with Her Majesty for this evening, claiming that she has urgent family business to discuss." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. After everything they had learned about Helena's activities, a request for an unscheduled private audience seemed highly suspicious. "Has the Queen agreed to see her?" Marcus asked. "Her Majesty is considering the request, but she wanted me to ensure that appropriate security measures are in place. Given recent events, she's concerned about the Duchess's true motivations." Marcus understood the Queen's dilemma. Refusing to meet with a family member would create questions and potential embarrassment, but agreeing to a private audience could provide Helena with an opportunity to access the private chambers unsupervised. "What does Colonel Westbrook recommend?" Marcus asked. "The Colonel is developing a security plan that would allow the meeting to proceed while ensuring that the Duchess has no opportunity to access restricted areas. She wants you to remain at your post throughout the evening, with additional backup positioned discreetly in the surrounding corridors." Marcus nodded, though he wondered what Helena might be planning that required such an urgent meeting. If she was indeed planning to steal documents from the private safe, a legitimate audience with the Queen might provide the perfect cover for her activities. "When is the meeting scheduled?" Marcus asked. 8 o'clock, Lady Catherine replied. The Queen thought it best to handle the matter promptly, rather than allowing uncertainty to build. Marcus checked his watch and realized that he had less than 2 hours to prepare for what might be one of the most challenging evenings of his career. If Helena was planning something criminal, the next few hours would determine whether she succeeded or whether the monarchy's most sensitive secrets remained secure. "I'll need to brief the night watch supervisor about the situation," Marcus said. "Already arranged," Lady Catherine replied. "Sergeant Fletcher will be remaining on duty as your backup, and Lieutenant Morrison will be coordinating with Colonel Westbrook to ensure that all contingencies are covered." As Lady Catherine returned to her duties, Marcus felt a familiar mixture of nervousness and anticipation that he remembered from his military service. The careful planning and preparation were reminiscent of pre-mission briefings, though the stakes here involved political and family dynamics rather than purely tactical considerations. The palace began its transition to evening routines, with most of the day's staff departing and the night shift taking their positions. The corridors became quieter, though Marcus knew that additional security personnel were now positioned throughout the building in preparation for the evening's events. At 7:30, Marcus received a brief radio check from Colonel Westbrook, confirming that all security measures were in place and that backup personnel were ready to respond to any developments. The level of preparation seemed almost excessive for a simple family meeting, but Marcus appreciated the thoroughness that characterized Colonel Westbrook's approach to security planning. At precisely 8 o'clock, Helena appeared at the far end of the corridor, walking with the same confident grace that had characterized her approach the previous morning. But Marcus now viewed her differently, seeing potential threat where he had previously seen only misguided persistence. She was dressed more formally than usual, in a navy blue dress that spoke of serious business rather than casual family conversation. Her manner seemed more controlled as well, lacking the calculated charm that had marked their previous interaction.
"Captain Thornfield," she said as she approached. "Good evening.
"I believe the Queen is expecting me." "Good evening, Your Grace," Marcus replied formally. "Her Majesty is indeed expecting you. Lady Catherine will escort you to the meeting room." Helena's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of Lady Catherine's escort, and Marcus could see her evaluating this deviation from normal protocol. Typically, family members would be admitted directly to the Queen's chambers without additional supervision, but the current circumstances required enhanced security measures. "I see," Helena said carefully. "I hope there hasn't been some misunderstanding about the nature of my visit." "Not at all, Your Grace," Marcus replied smoothly. "Lady Catherine will simply ensure that you're properly announced and that Her Majesty is prepared to receive you." It was a diplomatic way of saying that Helena would be supervised throughout her visit, though Marcus was careful to frame it in terms of royal protocol rather than security concerns. The last thing they needed was for Helena to realize that her activities had been discovered and her true motivations suspected. Lady Catherine appeared at that moment, as if summoned by some invisible signal, her professional smile firmly in place. "Duchess Helena, how lovely to see you this evening. Her Majesty is ready to receive you in the blue drawing room." Marcus noted the choice of location with professional interest. The blue drawing room was one of the Queen's formal receiving rooms, elegantly appointed but notably separate from her private chambers and the location of the safe. It was a subtle but clear indication that this would be a formal audience rather than an intimate family conversation. Helena's eyes flickered with what might have been disappointment, though she quickly masked it with gracious acceptance. "Of course, the blue drawing room will be perfect. Thank you for arranging everything so efficiently." As Lady Catherine escorted Helena down the corridor toward the appointed room, Marcus maintained his position, but activated his radio earpiece to monitor the security communications that would track the meeting's progress. Colonel Westbrook had established a comprehensive surveillance plan that would ensure Helena's movements were monitored throughout the evening. "Duchess entering blue drawing room," came Lieutenant Morrison's quiet voice through the radio. "All positions confirmed, no unusual activity detected." Marcus settled in for what he expected to be at least an hour-long vigil. Royal audiences, even tense ones, rarely concluded quickly, and he anticipated that both the Queen and Helena would need time to address whatever issues had prompted this evening's meeting. 20 minutes later, the radio crackled again with an unexpected development. "Movement detected in the East Corridor," reported Sergeant Fletcher from his concealed position. "Unknown individual approaching the Queen's private chambers from the service stairway." Marcus felt his pulse spike as he realized that someone was attempting to access the Queen's chambers while she was occupied with Helena in the blue drawing room. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, and he immediately suspected that Helena's urgent meeting might have been designed as a distraction. "Maintain position and observe," came Colonel Westbrook's voice over the radio. "Do not engage unless there's an immediate threat to security." Marcus quickly moved to a position where he could observe both his normal post and the corridor leading to the service stairway. Within moments, he saw a figure emerge from the stairwell, a young man in palace maintenance clothing whom Marcus didn't immediately recognize. The maintenance worker moved confidently toward the Queen's chambers, carrying what appeared to be standard cleaning supplies. But something about his manner struck Marcus as wrong. He moved too purposefully, with none of the casual efficiency that characterized regular palace staff. "Unknown maintenance worker approaching target location," Marcus reported quietly into his radio. "Individual not recognized. No scheduled maintenance for this area." "Intercept and identify," came Colonel Westbrook's immediate response. "All units maintain positions unless ordered otherwise." Marcus stepped into the corridor, positioning himself directly between the maintenance worker and the entrance to the Queen's chambers. "Excuse me," he said in the firm but polite tone that palace security used for initial challenges. "Could I see your work authorization for this area?" The young man looked startled, clearly not expecting to encounter security at this location. He fumbled with his supplies for a moment before producing a work order that appeared to be properly formatted and stamped. "Emergency cleaning required in the private chambers," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't immediately place. "Water damage from the bathroom above." Marcus examined the work order carefully, noting that while it appeared authentic, something about the paperwork felt wrong. The timing stamp indicated that the damage had been reported less than an hour ago, which would explain why it hadn't appeared on the day's maintenance schedule. But Marcus had been in the area all day and had seen no evidence of water damage or emergency repair activity. "I'll need to verify this authorization," Marcus said, maintaining his polite but implacable tone. "Please wait here while I contact the maintenance supervisor." The young man's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of nervousness replacing his initial confidence. "The supervisor said this was urgent," he said. "The longer we wait, the worse the damage becomes." Marcus had heard similar pressure tactics countless times during his service, and they never indicated legitimate business. People with genuine authority rarely objected to having that authority verified, while those with questionable motives often became frustrated when faced with proper protocols. "I understand the urgency," Marcus replied calmly, "but security protocols require verification of all work orders for this area. It should only take a few minutes." As Marcus activated his radio to contact the maintenance supervisor, the young man took a step backward, his body language shifting in a way that immediately put Marcus on alert. Years of training and experience had taught him to recognize the subtle signs that preceded someone's decision to run or fight, and he could see both calculations playing out in the maintenance worker's expression. "Verification in progress," Marcus reported into his radio while keeping his eyes fixed on the young man. "Subject appears nervous and may be preparing to flee." The maintenance supervisor's voice came through clearly within seconds. "No emergency maintenance authorized for the Queen's chambers tonight. No water damage reported in that area." Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the confirmation that he was dealing with a genuine security threat. The young man was clearly not who he claimed to be, and his presence in the palace during Helena's strategic meeting could not be coincidental. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice taking on the authority that came with confirmed suspicion, "I'm going to need you to remain here while we sort out this discrepancy in your authorization." The young man's decision was immediate and predictable. He dropped his cleaning supplies and bolted toward the service stairway, moving with the speed and agility of someone who had planned his escape route carefully. "Suspect fleeing toward East Service Stairs," Marcus reported as he gave chase. "All units converge on exit points." The pursuit through the palace corridors was brief but intense, with Marcus drawing on his military training to navigate the maze of hallways and staircases that the suspect was using to try to reach an exit. The young man clearly knew the palace layout well, suggesting that he had either studied the building extensively or had inside assistance. Sergeant Fletcher intercepted the fleeing suspect at the main service exit, tackling him efficiently and professionally as Colonel Westbrook arrived with additional security personnel. The young man offered no resistance once caught, apparently realizing that his escape attempt had failed. "Search him thoroughly," Colonel Westbrook ordered as the suspect was secured. "I want to know everything he was carrying and everything he intended to do." The search revealed a small but sophisticated collection of lockpicking tools, a miniature camera, and a detailed floor plan of the Queen's private chambers with the location of the safe clearly marked. It was obvious that the young man had come prepared to break into the safe while the Queen was occupied elsewhere. "Professional equipment," observed Lieutenant Morrison as he examined the tools. This wasn't some opportunistic attempt. Someone planned this operation carefully. Marcus found himself thinking about the timing of Helena's urgent meeting and the appearance of a professional burglar in the Queen's chambers. The coordination required to synchronize both elements suggested a level of planning that went well beyond a simple family dispute or financial desperation. "Colonel," Marcus said quietly, "should someone check on the meeting between Her Majesty and the Duchess? If this was coordinated, there might be additional elements to the plan." Colonel Westbrook nodded grimly. "Already in progress. Lady Catherine has been discreetly monitoring the situation, and the Queen has been informed that we've apprehended an intruder." The radio crackled with Lady Catherine's voice. "Meeting concluded. Duchess appears surprised and concerned about security incident. Her Majesty requests immediate briefing on intruder and any connections to family matters." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and confusion. If Helena had orchestrated the break-in attempt, her surprise at news of the intruder's capture seemed genuine enough to fool Lady Catherine, who was exceptionally skilled at reading people's reactions. "Bring the suspect to interview room 3, Colonel Westbrook ordered. "I want a complete interrogation before we decide how to proceed." As the security team escorted the captured intruder away, Marcus found himself reconsidering everything he thought he understood about the evening's events. The timing of Helena's meeting and the burglar's attempt could indeed be coincidental. But Marcus's experience suggested that such convenient timing was rarely accidental. Colonel Westbrook approached Marcus as the immediate excitement subsided. "Excellent work tonight, Captain. Your adherence to protocol prevented what could have been a significant security breach." "Thank you, Colonel. Do we know yet whether the Duchess was involved in planning this incident?" "That's what we're going to find out," Westbrook replied grimly. "But regardless of her involvement, tonight's events demonstrate that information about the safe's location and importance has leaked to people with criminal intent. We're going to need to review all security protocols and possibly relocate sensitive materials." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. If the safe's location and contents were known to criminals, then the current security arrangements were compromised regardless of who was responsible for the leak. "Will there be additional charges against the intruder?" Marcus asked. "That depends on what we learn during interrogation and whether we can establish connections to other parties. Breaking and entering in a royal residence is serious enough, but if this was part of a larger conspiracy, the charges could be much more severe." As the evening wound down and additional security personnel took over the investigation, Marcus found himself reflecting on the complex web of duty, loyalty, and suspicion that defined palace security work. Tonight's events had demonstrated that threats to royal security could come from anywhere, even from within the royal family itself. The interrogation of the captured intruder eventually revealed that he was a professional thief who had been hired by an intermediary to steal specific documents from the Queen's safe. He claimed to have no direct contact with his ultimate employer and insisted that he had been paid to retrieve genealogy records that his contact claimed were needed for legitimate historical research. The story was plausible enough to create reasonable doubt about Helena's direct involvement, though Marcus remained suspicious of the timing and the specific nature of the documents that the thief had been hired to steal. Genealogy records were exactly what Helena had claimed to need during her attempted access to the safe. Colonel Westbrook's final briefing painted a complex picture of palace security that would require ongoing vigilance. The intruder had possessed detailed knowledge of palace layouts and security procedures that could only have come from someone with legitimate access to such information. Whether that person was Helena, another family member, or a palace employee remained to be determined. "The Queen has decided to handle this matter with maximum discretion," Westbrook informed Marcus during their private debrief. "The intruder will be prosecuted quietly, and additional security measures will be implemented without public acknowledgement of the breach." Marcus understood the decision, though he personally would have preferred a more aggressive investigation that might have revealed the full extent of any conspiracy. But royal families had always balanced security concerns against the need to maintain public confidence and avoid embarrassing revelations. In the days that followed, Helena's behavior toward Marcus became noticeably cooler, though she maintained the polite courtesy that palace protocol required. Whether her changed attitude reflected embarrassment over her failed attempt to access the safe or suspicion that Marcus had contributed to whatever investigation had followed the security incident, he couldn't determine. The Queen's private safe was eventually relocated to a more secure location with enhanced access controls that required multiple authorization levels and continuous monitoring. The old safe remained in place as a decoy, containing only harmless documents that would disappoint anyone who managed to breach its security. Marcus continued his duties with increased awareness of the complex political and personal dynamics that swirled through palace life. The incident had reminded him that his oath to protect the crown encompassed not just physical security, but also protection from those who would exploit royal privileges for personal gain. The professional thief was eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison for attempted burglary of royal property, though the identity of his employer was never definitively established. The investigation revealed a network of collectors and dealers who specialized in acquiring royal memorabilia through questionable means, but no direct connections to palace residents were ever proven. Helena remained part of the royal family, though her access to sensitive areas was quietly restricted, and her activities were subject to discreet monitoring. Whether she had been directly involved in the attempted theft or had simply been careless in her inquiries about royal documents, her position within the family had been permanently altered by the incident. Marcus found satisfaction in knowing that his adherence to protocol had prevented a potentially devastating security breach, regardless of who might have been behind it. The phrase, "not a chance," had become more than just a refusal to bend security rules. It had become a declaration that the Crown's most precious secrets would be protected by those sworn to guard them, no matter what pressures or temptations they might face. In the quiet moments of his daily vigil outside the Queen's chambers, Marcus often reflected on the delicate balance between trust and vigilance that defined his profession. The palace required both the confidence that came from knowing its residents and staff were trustworthy, and the caution that recognized that trustworthiness could be compromised by circumstances, desperation, or simple human weakness. The incident with Helena had demonstrated that threats to royal security could emerge from the most unexpected sources and in the most sophisticated forms. But it had also proven that proper protocols, professional training, and unwavering commitment to duty could protect against even the most carefully planned attempts to compromise royal security. As Marcus continued his service, he carried with him the knowledge that every day might bring new challenges to his oath and his principles. But he also carried the confidence that came from having faced such a challenge and emerged with his integrity intact, his duty fulfilled, and the Crown's secrets secure. The palace returned to its normal rhythms, though with enhanced security measures that reflected the lessons learned from the incident. And Marcus resumed his post with a deeper understanding of both the importance of his role and the complex human dynamics that made royal protection work one of the most challenging and rewarding forms of public service. Not a chance. How a royal guard stopped Camilla from opening the Queen's private safe.